America Meredith is the publishing editor of First American Magazine and an art critic, visual artist, and independent curator, whose curatorial practice spans 28 years. Based in Norman, Oklahoma, she earned her MFA degree from the San Francisco Art Institute and taught Native art history at the Institute of American Indian Arts, Santa Fe Community College, and the Cherokee Humanities Course. And America is of the Cherokee Nation. Welcome, Meredith. America.
Everyone does it, it's fine. Okay. Yeah, I'm also trying to switch. Okay. Yeah, so thank you so much, Nancy and Heather, for these incredible, really broad discussions. I'm going to hone in really on something very specific, and I'm going to talk about words. I'm obsessed with style guides. Heather won't let me see the style guide from the First Americans Museum. I'm like, no, I want to see it. And also, I am not affiliated with the university. All my training is, all my degrees are as a visual artist, and I'm deeply invested in humble public discourse, mainstream art writing, because I think we need to reach the artists, we need to reach the collectors, we need to reach the public. So I'm deeply invested in that. However, my talk does encompass art writing and on every form, and then curation, and I'm specifically looking at tribal affiliations and also related terms about geography and culture. But anyway, listing tribal or cultural affiliations might seem like a minor detail, but this practice has massive, massive ramifications, in some situations, legal ramifications. And personally, as a writer, an artist, and an editor, and a curator, when discussing art by Indigenous peoples of the Americas as a default, I list the Indigenous person's tribal or cultural affiliation next to their name, usually on the first mention or in the title. And in the mainstream kind of Eurocentric art world, it privileges the individual, but I think something about Indigenous communities, we are Indigenous because of our community. A core principle is our group identity, not us as individuals. And I do know that some countries, such as in Mexico, Indigenous identity hinges on language use. You're Native because you speak your native language. I have friends here that would like very much for us to follow that suit. But anyway, in the mainland United States, Native identity hinges upon tribal enrollment. This conversation is a bit focused on the United States because that's simply what I know best. And terminology around the tribal enrollment, cultural affiliation, and ethnic groups can be this kind of illogical patchwork that's political. It discusses ancestry, it discusses culture, especially the languages, geography, where you live, and even your skin color. So words have meanings. We should strive to be clear and accurate as possible. The terms can be contested and they do change over time, but my goal is to respect Indigenous peoples and how they wish to be described. I try to balance accuracy, brevity, consistency, and the artist's personal preference. And that's a balancing act. So, one doesn't always win out over the other. First American Art Magazine does have an in-house style guide that is available online at our website, which is the longest URL, firstamericanartmagazine.com. So beginning with geographical terms, I'll start with America. And I use it, the Americas, to refer to North and South America. My understanding is that in South America, the entire landmass that is the Western Hemisphere is considered a single continent that is called America. Meanwhile, in Canada, from my perspective, it appears that the word America often is seen as referring to the United States. While every country in the Western Hemisphere besides Greenland, Canada, and the United States, America tends to refer to this entire large landmass that goes from Greenland to Tierra del Fuego. And I do actually have a map of what the Americas are, because I think a lot of people just simply don't understand. And this actually makes me really angry, but I do get quite angry when writers use North America to only refer to Canada and the United States. North America begins with Panama, it includes the Caribbean, it ends with Greenland. North America has 23 sovereign nation states and 23 non-sovereign territories, and thousands upon thousands of tribes and millions of Indigenous people, the majority of which live in Mexico. So to only describe two countries and ignore the rest of the continent is simply inaccurate. And I used to say this is Anglophone bias, but Guyana, Belize, most of the Caribbean, they speak English too. So there's just no logic at play. So please, when you're discussing North America, consider the continent. And I do use the term Indigenous Peoples of the Americas. That's part of our subtitle. That is kind of a little tongue-in-cheek how you have to be careful with the word. So it's very long and cumbersome, but it is the most accurate. And it encapsulates the diverse people that are native to these continents, but it's unwieldy. I don't really use the term Indigenous Americans because, again, I think in Canada that might be, and in the United States too, it might be interpreted as only referring to the United States. And when you see peoples plural, that's highlighting that there are many different communities of people. So not just individuals, many individuals, but many discrete communities. Native American, which was kind of introduced mid to late 20th century, I use it personally to mean indigenous peoples of what is now the United States, and that's very unwieldy. And these include tribes from within the United States and Alaskan Natives, and then different people on usage, like I know Native Arts and Culture Foundation, they use the term Native American to also include Native Hawaiians, Samoans, Chamorro, and other Pacific Islanders who are politically part of the United States due to the results of American imperialism, US imperialism. That's a constant struggle. But anyway, even though the Pacific homelands are not part of the North American continent. And then what's interesting is Native American is also used in Panama to describe indigenous peoples of Panama. American Indian, I feel that I need to use this term often to like reclaim my right to use this term, because I've had many non-Native people tell me that it's not okay for me to use this term, and I don't think that's appropriate. It is not the preferred term in Canada. So in referring to Canadian topics, I don't use the word except in proper nouns, like a title of an artwork. American Indian is not synonymous with Native American. They're Alaskan Natives and Pacific Islanders, and they are not American Indian. In Latin America, I kind of followed the lead of, and this is kind of the theme throughout, I followed the lead of what the artists use, what the curators use, and what the art historians use. Whether they choose to use this term or not, Indigenous is often used in Latin America. Here in the United States, the term Indian actually has a lot of really strong positive associations that it might not have in other countries, and certainly not in Canada. And our advocacy groups that have fought for our rights include the Society of the American Indian at the beginning of the 20th century, the National Congress of the American Indian. It appears in legislation that we fought for. So the American Indian Freedom of Religious Act, the Indian Child Welfare Act, the Indian Arts and Crafts Act, and many more. And if you look at the Federal Register, which you can search in any search engine, look for Federal Registrar, tribes, and then 2020 to get the most recent one. It's really easy to find. You don't have to download a PDF, but you can see from Alaska and the lower 48 states, many of these tribes use Indian in their own names. And while some individual Native people don't like to use the term, and I try not to force it upon them, it is absolutely not our place to tell tribes what they should or should not name themselves. Alaskan Native is a geographical term, and it, again, is this umbrella term for indigenous peoples of Alaska, and those include American Indian peoples such as Tlingit, Haida, Ayak, Athabaskan, and others, but also includes Inuit in Alaska, the Inupiat, Yupik peoples, and Unangan or Aleut, and those are not, again, they're not American Indians. So Alaskan Native is something that the US Census use. Eskimo is an interesting term. I don't use it, and it's definitely not preferred in Canada. It's falling out of use in Greenland, but it is used in Alaska sometimes. For instance, in the World Eskimo Indian Olympics. And I had a Onangat student who told me he thought it was really funny when other people are trying to be offended on his behalf. So I'm not Alaskan Native, of course, so it's not my place to dictate how people in Alaska want to use their term. If they want to use the term Eskimo, that's their right. And then First Nations is a Canadian term. It really isn't used, to describe people of other countries. It's used for people of Canada who are not Inuit, and not Métis. And my understanding is in Canada, the term Aboriginal is falling out of use. And Métis is an interesting term. I use it with a capital M. I never use it with a lowercase m. And it refers to a very specific group of people who descend from European and First Nation ancestry, predominantly French and Cree, but there's others. And these people have a shared culture, a shared history, and a shared language, Michif, that has developed over the centuries. So it can't be claimed by anyone who is just, who says that they're of mixed and European and Native ancestry. Daryl LaRoe has written really extensively on this growing trend of Euro-Canadians, especially in his area in Eastern Canada, that now claim to be Eastern Métis. And he's demonstrated that these people do not have Indigenous ancestry. He published Distorted Descent, White Claims to Indigenous Identity through the University of Manitoba Press in 2019. So he's really done the scholarship and he's been able to publish. But, you know, some in the South have tried to use this term and kind of co-opt it. And one solution proposed by Métis artist Christina Belcourt is to use the term Michif, which is an alternative term for this community and also refers to their language. And when our magazine wrote about Christina Belcourt, she asked to use the term Michif, so we honored her request. And recently I had the honor of discussing African Native artists. And I have to admit, I was a little nervous because I don't feel like I have the best vocabulary. For years, I was an Indian market artist in Santa Fe, and I was next to two incredibly talented artists that are enrolled in their pueblos, and they're also of African descent. And the conversation never came up, ever, throughout the entire weekend. So I've kind of looked at how other people have used the term, and I know Anna Montiel just published this really wonderful article, Together We Lift Up the Sky, in the current issue of Smithsonian Magazine, and she used the term Black Indigenous. And typically, I use the term African American, but in writing an essay about Ammonia Lewis, Mississauga Ojibwe artist, I use Black with a capital B, and that's a whole other conversation, because her parents are from Canada, her mother's from Canada, and her father's from the United States. So you know, so I just use Black. And then there's South American terms that are acceptable down there for people of mixed African and Indigenous ancestry. And I don't feel comfortable using those terms. And then the actual brass tacks of writing someone's name and their tribal affiliation. In the first issues of FAM, I used hyphens between the tribes, and I was, you know, and Heather very politely asked me, why am I doing this? And I was like, oh. And I realized recently in the last week, I saw student publications from Bacone College, where I lived when I was a kid, back from 1980, and it had that. So I read that as a small child, and it stuck with me over these years. And they look fine for one or two, but when, you know, many artists claim like 4 or 5 tribes, it starts getting a little ridiculous. So I just pulled, like, we constantly poll each other. I pulled the writers and editors to see if they wanted to use the more common slash, and they said yes. So we changed. You know, I think you need that flexibility to change. And I have noticed in writing, people will just use commas, spaces, and, like I am Chickasaw and Chickahominy and Paiute. That just takes up more room. So I don't personally use that, because using that extra and, I think in writing, every extraneous word that does not actively add meanings detracts. And then the order of tribes, I thought this was common knowledge, but typically if someone's enrolled in a tribe, you use that first. And then sometimes people are dually enrolled, like Nanette Kelly is enrolled in both the Cherokee Nation and the Osage Nation. So she can choose either way. So I follow her lead. And you know, we have a writer that's she's enrolled in 3 tribes, so we just follow her lead. And sometimes people switch the order, so I try to follow that as best as possible. And people do disenroll from one tribe and re-enroll from another tribe, so that's just a reality on the ground. We try to keep up as best we can. And then I think a good resource is artist bios and statements. And that's probably the best place to search to find out how the artist wants to. And then, of course, in conversation, if you're able to reach out to the artist and just ask them, that's really good. And I really encourage artists to speak up. And I do myself, when people write something that you don't prefer, do it in a civil manner, polite manner. No one likes to be corrected, but I really encourage artists to speak up about how they want to be listed. We actually do have a list. FAAM has a list online, the Artist and Scholar list, just to save us, you know, looking up everyone's dates when they were born and passed on and what their tribal affiliations are. And that's, you know, that helps us. So that's an internal list. It's kind of embedded, but you can find it if you want. Someone posted on social media, and exactly what I was afraid happened is all these people are really angry that they weren't listed, or, you know, such famous artists weren't listed. And of course, it's impossible to list everyone. We just add people as we write about them. But that is available to the public if you poke around. And one thing is, on every single page, I have an email, and I'm like, if you have corrections, please, write us. And I was really happy because recently an artist, we had them listed as 2 tribes, and he pointed out that it was only 1 tribe was correct. So we changed it. So I'm like, yes, this system worked. So, and this, I know I'm treading into dangerous territory. And again, this is a group identity. And I think it's really important that the Native art world really, the mainstream art world really gives a lot of credence to self-identity, and that just doesn't work with the tribal identity. And again, to paraphrase the Cherokee Nation lawyer, Steve Russell, it's not who you claim, it's who claims you. So self-identification is simply insufficient. The tribe has to verify this claim, or the tribe has to claim the individual. Otherwise, if someone's not enrolled and the tribe doesn't claim them in some other manner, and there's many ways that a tribe they can designate tribal artisans of anyone, then the tribal affiliation should simply be left out. And listing someone publicly in print as a member of a specific community is not a neutral act. Belonging to a tribe is not a right that anyone can claim. It is a privilege. And Native artists often serve as ambassadors for their communities, so their actions reflect back on that community. And as tribal members, we are beholden to our communities too. We're accountable to our communities, so there's that exchange. And just a reminder that accuracy is really important. When you write, you should really strive to be as accurate as possible. And I know this is an impossible promise, but I tried to promise myself I would never knowingly publish an untrue statement, which has led to some very hard conversations. But I think those conversations need to be had. And I had made mistakes, and I just try to correct them. We have an arouse section. And again, just the balance and the ongoing conversation is so important. And yeah, flexibility is important because this is an artist's heritage and people feel very strongly. These words can be very loaded. They're laden with deep histories. So for instance, some people from the Turtle Mountain Chippewa tribe wish to be listed as Turtle Mountain Chippewa, while others want to be listed as Turtle Mountain Ojibwe. So as best I can, I try to honor that. So I would, whenever you're writing about artists that you're not directly in touch with, just do a search, we have so much information at our fingertips, just kind of see how they've been written about in the past and if there's a strong trend, and also most importantly in how they write about themselves. So at FAM, among writers and editors, we have this incredible brain trust. So we freely consult each other about individual cases and broad protocols. And one instance, I used to use Muskogee Creek. And then if someone had multiple tribes, I'd simply say Muskogee. So we have Muskogee writers. So I asked them how they would prefer. And they're members of the Muskogee Creek Nation. And then there's also federally recognized Creek tribal towns. And after a very long, wonderful discussion, they decided they didn't want the term Creek used, and the Muskogee, and then Muskogee. So I'm going to spell that MVSKOKE. That those would be the options preferred. And that would be up to the writer or the artist's preference. And you kind of pick one or the other for each article and try to remain consistent within the article. And then I have a dear friend who prefers Muskogee with an I at the end. So when I read about her, I use her preference. And then there is, I know this is not a fun subject to talk about, but ignoring it doesn't allow it to go away. So there is a massive problem of non-Native people falsely claiming to be Native. And specifically Cherokee here in our country is the largest problem. So one simple, I think elegant solution that I've been able to come up with that is standard for First American Art Magazine, and I've convinced the Oklahoma Arts Council to experiment and try this too, is always disambiguate Cherokee people into their specific tribes. And since we do that and I'll revisit that, but since we do that with Cherokee, and Choctaw Nation of Oklahoma is the 3rd largest tribe in the country, I recently asked, and I was like, well, should we start disambiguating Choctaw people? And people said yes. So now instead of simply putting Choctaw after an artist name, I put Choctaw Nation, Mississippi Choctaw, or Jina Choctaw. And then if someone's enrolled in another tribe of Choctaw descent, I put just, the enrolled tribe, and then Choctaw. So Norma Howard, she's enrolled in the Choctaw Nation of Oklahoma. She's of Choctaw, she's of Chickasaw Nation descent and Mississippi Choctaw descent. So we put Choctaw Nation and then Chickasaw. But the Cherokee situation is interesting because overwhelmingly the frauds are unfortunately claimed to be Cherokee. And I don't know if people appreciate how widespread this is, but non-native people claiming to be Cherokee outnumber Cherokee people many times over. And this problem is very widespread. It spreads beyond the United States. And this problem, the situation has gone on since the mid-19th century, beginning in Georgia, among European American people in Georgia. Please never describe a living person as simply Cherokee. Either choose their specific tribe, and if someone is unenrolled, and we'll get into that, but they have documented Cherokee ancestry, list them as being of Cherokee descent. And then you can easily clear up ambiguity and misrepresentation of hundreds of thousands of people without, attacking anyone or causing that kind of, really painful conversation. State recognized tribes are very diverse. Some are clearly Native people. Others are frankly open to anyone who pays a membership fee. And I'm just going to say this, every state recognized tribe that is claiming to be Cherokee, and there are many, is listed as a fraudulent tribe by the Eastern Band of Cherokee Indians and by the Cherokee Nation. The third tribe, the United Kituwa Band of Cherokee Indians, is not involved in that. And those are the three Cherokee tribes, the Eastern Band of Cherokee Indians, the Cherokee Nation, and the United Kituwa Band of Cherokee Indians. If your museum or institution works with artists from state recognized tribes, then just please list them by the specific group they belong to. So for instance, the Cherokee Creek Intertribal Indians is a state recognized tribe in Alabama. So you could just list their name. But please do not make up names for tribes, and this actually happens quite a bit. Both artists and writers kind of invent names for their tribes. So I do see enrolled members of the Cherokee Nation list themselves as being of the Cherokee Nation of Oklahoma. And here, if you're involved in Cherokee politics, that's a term that's very precisely used to undermine the credibility of the tribe. So I'm really shocked when I see people that are enrolled use that term, like, whoa. But anyway, that's not the name of the tribe. The name of the tribe is Cherokee Nation. And I've noticed several newspapers and news outlets have a policy of simply taking the base name of the group and then tacking nation on the end. And this creates an inaccurate name for the tribes. And I've seen this a lot with Kiowa. The name of the Kiowa tribe is Kiowa Indian Tribe of Oklahoma. And journalists will often say Kiowa and then tack on that nation. And there is a lowercase nation of Kiowa people, but there is no parentheses Kiowa capitalized nation. So I think it's very disrespectful and inaccurate to try to rename the tribe or invent a name for them. If the tribe wants to change their name, they absolutely are capable of doing so. And they do so through their constitution. And it happens all the time. Members within tribes might have different variations, and on tribal websites, you might see the different variations that are used. And then adoption's an interesting side note. Hunka is a Lakota ceremony, a very serious and ancient Lakota ceremony of making relatives. So if someone uses in their bio that they're Hunka Lakota, they have been ceremonially adopted by a particular Lakota extended family. So that means that they're a member of that family. It does not mean that the tribe adopted them. And it doesn't necessarily mean that they have Lakota ancestry. And then this might seem a silly case, but it is kind of a test case and it happened, the Comanche Nation adopted Johnny Depp. So people have discussed this, and that doesn't make Johnny Depp Indian. It doesn't make him Native American. It makes him an adoptive relative of the Comanche Nation. And like I said, federally recognized tribes in the United States select and update their names. These can be found, and to keep up with this, the most up-to-date versions can be found in their constitutions, which also has their enrollment criteria, or you can find it very easily. Just search Federal Register 2020 and tribes, and then you'll be able to find it. And that has a listing. The one right now lists all 564 tribes, including the Little Shell tribe of Chippewa Indians of Montana. And tribes might prefer to use the official name, for instance, Navajo Nation, or an autonym, a name that the group calls themselves, such as Dene. And I feel the public kind of understands what Navajo is and what Dene is. So we allow our authors to kind of choose one or the other, and then try to keep some consistency within the article. And Kiwa Pueblo recently officially changed their name to Kiwa Pueblo. They were formerly known as Santo Domingo Pueblo. And some of the artists, they've been Santo Domingo their entire life, so they prefer that name. So I honor that. Official names can sometimes be incredibly long, such as the Grande Band of Digueño and Mission Indians of the Mesa Grande Reservation. So one way to just shorten this name would be look at the terms they use on their own website, and tribal websites are gold. So you go to their website and you see that they describe themselves as Mesa Grande Band of Digueño Mission Indians, and that can be shortened to Mesa Grande Digueño, and you would still know which group of people you're being discussed. And with First Nations in Canada, I go straight to the First Nations own website. And with dissent, mainstream journalists often, just describe an individual as having such and such heritage or such and such ancestry or such and such descent. And I don't think they're aware of this, but that phrasing implies that someone is not an enrolled tribal member, but a descendant. So someone who's related to the tribe, but not enrolled. So for any number of reasons, a person might have ancestry within a tribe, but not be able to enroll in that tribe. And there might be minimum blood quantum requirements. Some tribes just simply close their rolls. Santa Clara Pueblo requires your father to be enrolled in the Pueblo. So if your mother is, but your father isn't, then you cannot enroll. And this has been upheld in court cases. So people in this situation might clarify that they are lineal descendants or direct descendants to a tribe. So they are truly related. They're not just making this vague claim on a family story. This is documented, this is real. And descendants, most importantly, they have relatives within their tribes. Numerous descendants work for their tribes. They contribute to their language programs. They participate in ceremonies. Some speak, the language and are fluent speakers. And they really contribute and give back without having that benefit of tribal enrollment. So please, if you only walk away with one thing, walk away with the fact that descendants are a completely different situation than non-native people making false or mistaken claims of indigeneity. Tribes do change their enrollment criteria over time. Sac and Fox Nation and Oto, Missouri Tribe of Indians just both lowered their blood quantum requirements. So it's now tribes are blind to these situations. So I've run out of time. I need to move quickly. So with mestizo and mestiza, I follow that. I follow what people in Latin America use. I find these terms very useful. Thiago Kostek, he is Potiguara in that he knows his people, he lived with them, but he wanted to be listed as mestizo Potiguara, so we followed what he said. And in many Latin American countries, such as Bolivia, Colombia, Venezuela, the overwhelming majority of the population has indigenous ancestry. However, their national identities can be very strong. So if people do not describe themselves as being of indigenous descent or being mestizo, I don't think it's my place to insert and make that claim for them. So I might list a nation state of origin instead of a cultural descent. I don't want to make assumptions, so I follow their lead. And then I also follow the lead, Chicano, Chicana, or Mexican American. James Luna, he would list himself as part of his ancestry as being Mexican American. Nani Chacon is Dene and Chicana, so I just followed their lead. And there is kind of a political legacy of being Chicano and Chicana that Mexican American doesn't have. And I feel that outsiders kind of want us all to lump together and be one thing, but our ancestors fought and died to resist assimilation and maintain our unique languages, religions, philosophies, histories, and government. We are not a race. In the United States, the Census Bureau uses the term American Indians and Alaskan Natives and then Pacific Islanders separately because we're not all one race. And in Canada, Inuit and Métis are not First Nations. So we're not a race, we don't share one look, we don't share one skin color. And for outsiders, this can be challenging or confusing to try to understand the complexity of Indigenous identities, but it's for the utmost, for many of us, our life missions to maintain and restore our own nation's unique identities. So these protective laws that Native people have fought hard for, like the Indian Child Welfare Act, have been mischaracterized by non-Native people trying to steal our children as being a law based on race. But it is based on a political status that Indigenous people in the United States, members of enrolled tribes, federally recognized tribes, have a unique political status that no other group has. And that's defined by the 1832 court case, Wisher versus Georgia. So after Rachel Dolezal, I kept seeing conversations about this being shut down, and I realized we're outnumbered. So once I realized that we're kind of not allowed to have this conversation, then I realized I need to try to insert this conversation, but be respectful and be fact-based, and not not let it go off subject. And the response has too often been not to discuss the facts on the table. People will jump in, outsiders will jump in and discuss DNA, they'll discuss blood quantum, purity test, that, oh no, you're not accepting people that aren't full blood, and that's not the conversation. And Jesse Brown, really, of Canada Land, recently said it wasn't Indigenous people who made Joseph Boyden the biggest Indigenous novelist in Canada. It was not Indigenous people who decreed that Michelle Latimer was to be the foremost Indigenous filmmaker in Canada. Our cultural establishment did that, and our cultural establishment is not Indigenous. How we manage that is not an Indigenous issue or a mess that Indigenous people should be left to clean up. This is a question for Canada's cultural gatekeepers to grapple with. So I would like to extend the problematic situation of false claims, beyond Canada, that it definitely needs to happen here in the United States. It's incredibly rare for anyone to ever publish a statement of who is not a tribal member. And if you've come into a questionable situation, please research, as Nancy said. If you're an academic researcher or a journalist, you can call the Tribal Enrollment Office. You can contact a genealogist. I don't understand why people don't do research. But anyway, yeah, I need to cut this very short. And I just think part of the core thing is self-acceptance. So I think we all need to honor our ancestors. So I'm predominantly Swedish more than anything else. I honor my Swedish ancestors. And I think everyone needs to, dig deep. And if you are not enrolled and you can't prove it, then before you make a public claim, please dig deep and do that research before you make a public claim. You can understand there's a wide gulf between having a family story that your grandmother told you and then describing yourself in a certain manner to get a grant. Like, that's a big leap. So please, artists, consider how you want your tribal and cultural affiliation to be listed and clearly state that on your bio and artist statement. If you're an artist or curator or someone else if someone else describes it inaccurately, please correct them. And then art writers, academics, and curators, please research what you write, especially if the information is vague or contradictory. If you're completely unfamiliar with a region or community, as I am with much of Latin America, and cannot readily clarify this information, reach out to more knowledgeable parties, especially tribal cultural centers and museums. Reach out to the tribes. Journalists, if your publication's in-house style confuses discussion or creates misleading statements, please speak up. I'm a freelance writer, but I have worked for newspapers just as a freelancer, and I've been able to negotiate bending the in-house styles to better reflect the realities on the ground. So if I can do it as a freelancer and you're an employee, I'll bet you can do it. And together, by being honest and precise and respectful, and by fact-checking, we can collectively help to better understand the beautiful complexities of Indigenous communities and our shared histories. So thank you very much.